The courthouse clerk cleared her throat, scanning the adoption papers. "There's a discrepancy, Major Miller." Brenda, pale, squeezed his arm too hard. A cold dread seeped into Dale's gut. Exposed. Across the counter, a woman with brittle eyes offered a faint, satisfied smile. "Some truths, Major, refused to stay buried." Captain Dale Miller stood in Commander Harris's office at Fort Hood, Texas, the crisp edges of the deployment order held tightly in his hand. 30 days, rapid deployment exercise to Germany. It was standard procedure, part of the job he'd signed up for, but the timing felt like a cruel joke. Brenda was 8 months pregnant, her due date falling right in the middle of his absence. The thought of leaving her alone, so close to the arrival of their first child, twisted a knot in his stomach. "I understand your concern, Miller," Commander Harris said, his voice flat but not unkind. "Family comes first. As soon as the exercise concludes, you're on the first plane back stateside. That's a promise." The words offered a small measure of comfort, a thin rope in the churning sea of his worry. He packed his bags, the sterile military gear, a stark contrast to the tiny, brightly colored onesie Brenda had laid out on their bed, a silent testament to the life waiting to begin. The morning of his departure was overcast, the Texas sky a dull gray. Mike, their designated driver, a young PFC with a nervous twitch, navigated the winding road toward the airport. Brenda's goodbye had been brief, a tight hug and a whispered, "Be careful," her eyes glistening. Dale replayed her face in his mind, the swell of her belly beneath her maternity shirt. They were making good time. The conversation in the vehicle was sparse, just the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Suddenly, a flash of brown. "A deer," Mike yelled, his voice cracking as he swerved violently to the right. The world spun. Metal shrieked. A bone-jarring impact, then darkness. Dale woke to the smell of antiseptic and a dull throbbing that encompassed his entire body. Fluorescent lights glared down, blurring at the edges. A nurse, her uniform a pristine white, leaned over him. "Captain Miller, you're awake." His throat was parched. He tried to speak, but only a raspy sound emerged. He was in a Frankfurt military hospital. 5 days, the nurse told him. 5 days he'd been drifting in and out of consciousness. A broken arm, a shattered leg, fractured ribs, and a collapsed lung. The news came in a detached monotone, each injury a separate, cold fact. Brenda, she wasn't there. His first coherent thought was her. He fumbled for his phone on the nightstand, his left hand trembling. It took several attempts to dial their home number. Brenda answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Brenda, it's Dale. I'm in Germany. There was an accident." There was a long silence, then a sound like a dam breaking. A choked sob. "Oh, Dale, thank God you're alive. I've been calling the base. They wouldn't tell me anything." Then her voice dissolved into full-blown hysterics. "We lost the baby, Dale. I'm so sorry." The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his already damaged lungs. The room began to spin again, but this time it wasn't from the concussion. "What?" he managed, his own voice a fragile whisper. "Lost? What happened?" She recounted the story between shuddering breaths. Complications. The umbilical cord, she said, had wrapped around the baby's neck. They tried everything. A stillbirth, their daughter, Lily. His world, already tilted by the accident, now lay completely shattered. His vision blurred, not from the injury, but from the sudden, overwhelming wave of grief. He pictured the tiny onesie, unworn, never to be filled. His chest ached with a pain that dwarfed his physical injuries. Yet, through his own devastation, a primal instinct surfaced. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice raw. "Physically, I mean." Brenda assured him she was, physically fine. Emotionally, she was a wreck. The details of Lily's stillbirth, the cord, the efforts were repeated, each word hammering another nail into the coffin of his hopes. He clutched the phone, the cold plastic a grounding presence in a world that had lost its center. 2 weeks later, cleared for travel, Dale returned home, still navigating the world on crutches. Brenda met him at the door, a wraith of her former self. Her eyes were sunken, her face pale, but she held him tightly. They grieved together, a silent, shared agony that settled over their home like a shroud. He believed her. He had no reason not to. The tragic loss of their daughter, Lily, became the unspoken centerpiece of their lives, a wound that time would begin to scar over but never fully heal. 2 years later, Dale, now a major, received orders for Heidelberg, Germany. A fresh start, they told themselves. He focused on his recovery, both physical and emotional, and on his career. Brenda remained subdued, her grief a constant, quiet companion. After 3 years in Germany, another transfer came, this time to Fort Lewis, Washington. They settled into the field-grade quarters, the boxes from storage filling the rooms. Each unpacked item was a memory, a piece of their life, carefully placed. But the weight of what they had lost, what Dale believed they had lost, remained. Brenda adjusted the collar of her blouse in the hallway mirror. "I'm heading to the officer club meeting," she announced, her voice light, almost too cheerful. "You're still unpacking all those boxes?" Dale nodded, a cardboard flap already open. "Someone has to," he replied, a faint bitterness he hoped she wouldn't catch. He watched her leave, the door clicking shut, and the silence of their new quarters pressed in. He returned to the stacks of boxes, their labels a haphazard chronicle of their military life. Kitchen, books, old photos. He worked methodically, emptying one carton after another, the scent of stale cardboard and forgotten dust filling the air. Then, toward the bottom of a box marked "Misc Personal," tucked beneath a faded college yearbook and a collection of old letters, he found it. A small wooden box, about the size of a cigar box, its surface smooth from age. It wasn't one of the moving company's boxes. It was clearly something Brenda had packed herself, carefully. The label written in her neat, looping hand read, "Brenda's Papers and Childhood Memories." A flicker of unease, then curiosity, spurred him to open it. Inside, nestled among a few dried flowers and some elementary school report cards, were two envelopes tied together with a pale pink ribbon. The ribbon felt significant somehow, out of place among the ordinary mementos. His fingers, suddenly clumsy, untied it. He pulled out the first document. It was a birth certificate. His breath caught in his throat. The name at the top, Lily. The date of birth. The exact same date Brenda had tearfully told him their daughter had been stillborn. His eyes scanned down, his vision blurring, then sharpening, refusing to believe what it was showing him. Place of birth, a small county hospital in Texas, not the military facility he'd imagined. Mother, Brenda Jane Miller, née Hanson. Father, unknown. Father unknown? The words were a whisper, dry and raspy, lost in the quiet room. If he wasn't the father, who was? A cold, hard knot formed in his gut, growing with each racing beat of his heart. Stillborn. He heard her voice again, the tremor, the apology. "We lost the baby, Dale. I'm so sorry." It had been a lie, a monstrous, soul-crushing lie. Lily had been born alive, and she wasn't his. His hand shook as he reached for the second document, a legal form. Adoption certificate. Lily had been given up for adoption. Brenda's parental rights had been terminated. He read the fine print, the legal jargon turning into daggers in his mind. Biological father's permission not required, as father is listed as unknown. It was all there, laid bare. The betrayal, sharp and sudden, cut deeper than any injury from the accident. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of believing a shared tragedy, 6 years of grieving a child he never had, a child who was not only alive but had been given away. He felt foolish, utterly played. Every memory, every comforting word she'd offered in their grief now felt tainted, a cruel charade. He carefully placed the documents back in their envelopes, tied them again with the pink ribbon, and returned them to the wooden box. He closed the lid, the soft thud echoing loudly in the sudden silence of the room. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, accusations, and a suffocating sense of disbelief. How could she? How could he have been so blind? He sat on the edge of an unpacked box, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. His entire life with Brenda, the foundation upon which it was built, had just crumbled into dust. He needed air, space. He walked out onto the small back patio, the cool Washington breeze doing little to clear the fog in his head. The manicured lawn stretched out before him, a sea of green conformity. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. What did he do now? How did he even begin to talk about this? The betrayal was so immense, so absolute, he felt paralyzed. Brenda's car pulled into the driveway a short while later. He heard her footsteps, then the soft click of the patio door opening. "Dale, what are you doing out here? It's getting chilly." Her voice was still light, oblivious. He turned to her, forcing a neutral expression. He hadn't put the box back in the bigger one. It was still sitting on the floor in the living room, visible. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner of takeout, he went back into the living room, ostensibly to tidy up. The wooden box wasn't there. The spot where he'd placed it on the floor was empty. A new wave of dread washed over him. Had she seen him? Had she realized? "Oh, Dale," Brenda said, walking in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. "I just heard from Sarah Peterson. She and Dave are here at Fort Lewis, too. Wouldn't it be fun to catch up? Maybe next weekend?" Her smile was bright, an invitation to a normalcy that suddenly felt utterly false. The next few days were a blur of forced smiles and carefully chosen words. Dale moved through their new home like a ghost, his mind replaying the image of the birth certificate, the stark reality of father unknown. He pretended to be busy with unpacking, with work calls, with anything that would keep him from engaging Brenda directly. All the while, his eyes subtly scanned every room, every cupboard, every corner. The wooden box, however, was gone. Brenda had hidden it well, or perhaps disposed of it. The thought of its disappearance only amplified his dread. He knew he couldn't let it fester. The truth, or at least a version of it, needed to come out. He picked an evening, a quiet one after dinner, when Brenda seemed relaxed, flipping through a magazine. He sat on the couch, the distance between them feeling vast. "Remember when we first got married?" he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "It felt like everything was perfect. Then, then the accident, and losing Lily." He paused, watching her. Her eyes, fixed on the magazine, remained unblinking. "That was the hardest thing we ever went through, wasn't it?" Brenda sighed, a soft, melancholy sound. "Of course, Dale, it was awful. I still think about her." Her voice, edged with what sounded like genuine sorrow, felt like a slap. He pushed away the nausea rising in his throat. "I found something, Brenda," he said, his voice dropping, the carefully constructed normalcy crumbling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled photocopy he'd made of the birth certificate, a small, selfish act he'd managed before the box vanished. He laid it on the coffee table between them. The stark black and white, a damning indictment. "What is this, Brenda?" Her gaze fell upon the paper. Her face drained of color, slowly until it was bone white. Her eyes darted from the document to his face, then away. "What is that?" I I don't know. It must be a mistake. A clerical error." Her voice was a strained whisper, entirely unconvincing. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "Brenda, it's Lily's birth certificate. It says she was born alive. And it says father unknown." His voice was calm, almost dangerously so. He watched her defenses crumble, piece by agonizing piece. Tears welled in her eyes, then streamed down her cheeks. She was cornered. Okay, you're right. It's not a mistake." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was before you left for Germany, just before. We had that fight, remember? That awful fight, and I went out. I was stupid, Dale. So stupid." She lowered her hands, her face a mask of anguish. "It was a one-night stand, just one time. With someone I barely knew. I was so scared, so ashamed. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell you. I loved you, Dale. I didn't want to lose you." Her words tumbled out, a frantic, desperate confession. "When you got deployed, and then the accident, I panicked. I had the baby, and I gave her up. I couldn't raise her. Not after, not after that. And I made up the stillbirth story. To protect us, to protect our marriage. I just wanted us to have a future." His head reeled. The details of the fight she mentioned, hazy in his memory, suddenly clicked into place. They had argued about something trivial. Some misunderstanding. A one-night stand. It was a lie, a betrayal, but it was simpler than what he'd imagined. A moment of weakness, not a calculated, long-term deception about his child. His anger began to recede, replaced by a profound, sickening mixture of disgust and a strange, misplaced pity. She had suffered too, he rationalized. She had made a terrible mistake and then compounded it with a terrible lie, but perhaps it was out of fear, out of a desire to save what they had. He felt a pang of guilt. He had pushed her into this confession. He had forced her to relive a painful secret. Maybe he was complicit in her suffering, for not having seen her pain, for not having been there. "Brenda," he said, his voice heavy, "why didn't you just tell me?" She shook her head, tears still falling. "I was afraid you'd leave me." He reached across the table, took her hand. It felt cold and small in his. He wanted to scream, to rage, but the weariness in his bones, the desperate need for their life to have some semblance of solidity, held him back. "We'll get past this," he said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. "For our future." He pulled her into a hug, the gesture stiff, unnatural. She clung to him, sobbing. "I promise, Dale. From now on, I'll tell you everything. No more secrets, complete honesty." He held her, listening to her muffled creaks, and nodded. But beneath the surface of his acceptance, a gnawing doubt had taken root, a seed of suspicion carefully planted that whispered, "Can you ever truly trust her again?" The next few years took Dale and Brenda back to Europe, first to NATO headquarters in Belgium, then another posting in Germany. The change of scenery, the novelty of new cultures, and the demands of Dale's rising career seemed to smooth over the rough edges of their recent confession. They traveled, ate in quaint cafes, and Brenda particularly seemed to thrive in the expatriate social scene, always ready with a charming laugh or a witty remark. Life, on the surface, returned to normal. But for Dale, normalcy was a fragile construct. The cracks had formed, and he couldn't unsee them. He found himself watching Brenda with a new clinical eye, noticing the slight hesitation before she answered a direct question, the way her gaze sometimes shifted when she told a story, small inconsistencies that previously he would have dismissed. He replayed fragments of their early marriage in his mind, a canceled plan, an unexplained late night, a casual comment about a male colleague that now felt loaded with unspoken meaning. Each memory, once benign, now carried a faint but unsettling shimmer of suspicion. One evening, while reviewing their finances, Dale brought up life insurance. "I think we should look into updating our policies, Brenda," he suggested, keeping his tone casual. "With my new rank and all the travel, it just makes sense." Brenda waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, we don't need all that, Dale. It's just more money out the door. We're fine. You're still young, you're careful." Her reluctance was immediate, almost too quick. The conversation was dropped, but her resistance, so firm, added another subtle layer to his unease. He didn't push it. Instead, he quietly went to a civilian attorney and updated his own will, making sure that, should anything happen to him, Brenda would not be the sole beneficiary. It was a cold, pragmatic act, a testament to the growing chasm of distrust. His investigation began subtly, almost subconsciously at first. He started digging into old records from their time at Fort Hood, using his military clearances to access general information about personnel movements, transfers, and retirements from that period. He contacted old colleagues, ostensibly to catch up, but always with a discreet, casual question woven into the conversation. "Remember anyone moving out around that time? Anyone interesting?" No one volunteered anything specific, but the act of asking, of looking, began to solidify his quiet determination. He bought a small, leather-bound journal, the kind tourists picked up in European gift shops. Each night after Brenda had fallen asleep, he meticulously documented his thoughts, his observations, and the growing timeline of her deceptions. The one-night stand. It felt too clean, too convenient. A desperate, hastily constructed story to explain away a 6-year-old lie. The memory of her confession, the practiced tears, the earnest pleas, now seemed too rehearsed, too perfectly timed. The idea that this wasn't a single isolated mistake, but a prolonged, deeper betrayal, began to haunt his waking hours and seep into his dreams. The burden of his suspicions became heavy, isolating. He needed advice, but couldn't risk revealing the raw, shameful details. He thought of his mentor, General Peterson, Dave Peterson's father, a man of quiet integrity and sharp intellect. He arranged a meeting, ostensibly to discuss career progression. General, Dale began, choosing his words carefully over coffee in a quiet cafe in Brussels. I'm facing a personal crisis. It's complicated, not military related. I just need some general guidance on how to navigate something deeply unsettling, something that involves truth and trust. General Peterson, his gaze steady and direct, listened without interruption. When Dale finished, the general leaned back, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Truth, Major Miller, is a stubborn thing. It often demands to be found no matter how much you try to bury it, and it often hurts more in the uncovering than in the facing. My advice? Seek the truth. All of it, no matter how painful. Living with a partial truth or a convenient lie will only fester. He held Dale's gaze. You owe it to yourself. The general's words, so calmly delivered, resonated deep within Dale. Seek the truth. All of it. He left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, a cold, hard resolve settling over him. He would uncover the full extent of Brenda's deception. He would find out who the real father was. He would understand every twisted corner of her story. The transfer to the Pentagon came with a promotion to lieutenant colonel, and with it, a new level of access and a comforting cloak of anonymity within the vast labyrinthine bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. Dale used it. He moved with a quiet, methodical precision, channeling his growing anger and icy determination into research. The journal became his constant companion, filled with cryptic notes and coded entries. His first objective was to find the adoption agency. The birth certificate provided the county, in a few late nights on secure government databases, cross-referencing public records and legal filings, led him to Hope's Promise, a small private adoption agency in Ohio. He learned Lily had been placed with a family there, a life entirely separate from the one he had mourned. Navigating the legal hoops to unseal records was arduous. He used every ounce of his intelligence, every trick he'd learned in military intelligence, fabricating a plausible backstory about a distant relative searching for family history. He spoke to sympathetic clerks, hinted at a family medical mystery, and leveraged his rank just enough to imply a level of importance without drawing undue attention. After weeks of persistence, a heavily redacted document arrived. It listed the biological mother as Brenda Jane Hansen, her maiden name, and after much effort and a subtle nudge to a contact in county records, the name of the biological father. Frank Carlson. The name hit him with the force of a physical blow, not some random stranger from a one-night stand. Frank Carlson, a major at Fort Hood, someone he knew, someone he'd served alongside, someone who had been in their social circle. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Carlson had been transferred shortly after Lily's birth, a detail Dale had dismissed at the time as a routine reassignment. Now it screamed cover-up. Dale dug deeper into Carlson. Frank Carlson was no longer in the military. He had transitioned into the defense industry, a successful civilian contractor with a company that frequently worked with the Pentagon. His name appeared on various corporate registries and industry panels. A quick search revealed that Frank Carlson's wife had passed away a few years prior, a quiet notice in a local paper. The more Dale investigated, the more the intricate web of deception unraveled. He uncovered old photos from social gatherings at Fort Hood, images that now seemed to betray a subtle intimacy between Brenda and Frank. A hand lingered too long, a shared glance, a closeness in their posture that he, in his naive trust, had completely overlooked. He found indirect references to Frank facilitating administrative assistance for an adoption, leveraging his military connections to grease wheels to make a sensitive process disappear more smoothly. The father unknown on the birth certificate wasn't about a casual encounter. It was a deliberate act to protect Frank Carlson, a married man. Brenda's one-night stand confession now felt like a cruel joke. It wasn't a panicked mistake. It was a calculated deception, a carefully constructed lie to minimize the truth, to keep him from digging deeper, to hold on to him while protecting the other man. The realization curdled in his stomach. The betrayal was not just about the child, it was about the entirety of their relationship, a 6-year charade built on a foundation of infidelity and deceit. The convenient lie of the one-night stand had kept him from the truth, kept him believing in their shared future. He needed to hear it from Frank directly. He needed to see the other man's face when the truth was spoken. He needed confirmation, not just from documents and suspicions, but from the source. He carefully crafted an email posing as a mutual contact, someone who remembered their time at Fort Hood, eager to reconnect. He suggested coffee, a meeting discreetly off base, in a small cafe in Arlington. He would get the truth, one way or another. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The nondescript hotel bar was quiet, a perfect backdrop for the conversation Dale intended to have. Frank Carlson, older now, with a softening around his middle and a confident swagger that hadn't quite faded, shook Dale's hand. Dale Miller. Good to see you, Major. Been a long time since Fort Hood. Dale smiled, a thin, tight line. Lieutenant Colonel now, Frank. And yes, it has. Been a lot of water under the bridge. He ordered a bourbon, Frank a scotch. They talked about the old days, about mutual acquaintance, the easy camaraderie of former servicemen. Dale listened, his gaze steady, searching for any tell. Frank seemed relaxed, unsuspecting. Then Dale carefully steered the conversation. Speaking of Fort Hood, I ran into someone the other day who asked about Brenda. My wife, remember Brenda? Frank's hand, lifting his glass, paused imperceptibly. His eyes, for the briefest moment, flickered. Brenda. Yes, of course. How's she doing? His voice was a little too casual, a little too quick. She's fine, Dale replied, his voice flat. Still the same, you know. Charming. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Funny, she mentioned something recently about a mutual friend of ours from back then. Someone she said she had a brief fling with before I deployed to Germany. Said it was a mistake, a one-time thing. Dale watched Frank's face, seeing the subtle stiffening, the sudden tightening around his jaw. And she mentioned something else, about complications, around the time our daughter, Lily, was due. Frank set his glass down, the clink sharp in the quiet bar. He tried a weak smile. Dale, I don't know what you're talking about. I was married, you know that. And Brenda, she was your wife. That's right, Dale said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of warmth. He pushed a folded photocopy across the table. It was the adoption certificate, with Frank Carlson's name highlighted. And this little girl, Lily, who Brenda told me was stillborn, was adopted. And the father, who was listed as unknown, was actually you, Frank. Dale's gaze locked onto Frank's, cold and unforgiving. You ruined my life, Frank. You and Brenda. You took my child. My marriage was a lie. The color drained from Frank's face. His confident facade shattered. He slumped in his chair, running a hand through his thinning hair. Oh God, Dale. I'm so sorry. The words were a ragged whisper. Then, the dam broke. Frank confessed. It wasn't a one-night stand. It was a 2-year affair. It started before Dale's deployment, festered through his absence, and continued even after he returned. Brenda, Frank admitted, was the instigator, the one who pushed for more, for a future together. He spoke of her manipulation, her leveraging his influence and connections to facilitate the adoption, to make the inconvenient truth disappear. She had used his wealth to ensure the records were sealed, that no one would ever connect him to the child. Brenda had intended to leave Dale for Frank, he revealed, but the accident, the fear of exposure, had made Frank back out. He had a career, a reputation, and a dying wife at the time. He couldn't risk the scandal. So Brenda, desperate, fabricated the stillbirth, burying their secret deeper. Frank's remorse felt hollow, tinged with self-pity. Dale saw it as self-preservation, a man caught, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left. But the confession, raw and explicit, gave Dale exactly what he needed. Undeniable proof. A clear, stark picture of the depth of Brenda's betrayal and Frank's willing complicity. He pushed back from the table. Thank you, Frank, Dale said, his voice flat, emotionless. That's all I needed to hear. He left Frank Carlson sitting alone at the table, a broken man in a nondescript bar. Dale walked out into the cool evening air, his mind already spinning. Public exposure now? No, that would be too quick, too merciful. He wanted something slower, something more devastating, a calculated revenge that would unravel their lives, thread by painstaking thread. He would ruin Brenda and Frank, professionally and personally, with the same cold, deliberate precision they had used to ruin him. A fleeting image of Lily, a child he had never known, flashed in his mind. He knew his actions would impact her too, a ripple effect of their parents' ends. The thought brought a pang of conflict, a whisper of doubt. But the burning need for justice, for restitution, quickly overshadowed it. His resolve hardened. He went home, not to Brenda, but to his study. He pulled out his journal. He began to list names, dates, financial accounts. Every legal avenue, every professional consequence, every public exposure point. He would meticulously gather all legal and financial documentation. He was no longer just seeking the truth. He was building a case for ruin. The gears of Dale's revenge began to turn, slowly at first, then picking up a relentless, grinding pace. He didn't make grand gestures or public accusations. His approach was far more insidious. He subtly manipulated his professional network, planting seeds of doubt about Frank Carlson's integrity. A casual remark in a hallway at the Pentagon, a carefully worded email about rumors of impropriety on an old contract, a suggestion to a colleague that a particular defense contractor might warrant closer scrutiny. He anonymously leaked snippets of information about Frank's past unethical practices to key individuals in the defense industry, not enough to be traced back to him, but enough to raise red flags. Soon the whispers began. Frank's previously robust contract pipeline started to constrict. Deals that seemed assured suddenly fell through. His reputation, once solid, became tainted by innuendo and suspicion. His financial stability, built on the shifting sands of government contracts, began to waver. Dale watched from a distance, a cold satisfaction settling in his gut. At home, Dale's emotional distance from Brenda became a palpable chill. He spoke only when necessary, his words clipped, his gaze empty. The house, once filled with their quiet domesticity, now echoed with silence. Brenda noticed, of course. She tried her usual tactics, a flirty smile, a concerned question, a soft touch. "What's gotten into you, Dale?" she'd ask, her voice laced with feigned concern. He would offer a vague answer about work stress or just a shrug and retreat further into himself, into his plans. One evening, after the silence had grown unbearable, Dale sat Brenda down. "I've filed for divorce, Brenda," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Irreconcilable differences, and I'll be requiring full financial disclosure." Brenda's composure shattered. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Divorce? Are you serious? What are you talking about? What irreconcilable differences? You're being ridiculous, Dale." She tried to charm him, to manipulate him, her voice rising in indignation. "You're just stressed from work. We can fix this. We always do." He leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. From a file folder on the table, he pulled out the birth certificate, the adoption papers, and a collection of emails and photographs he'd discreetly gathered. Evidence of her and Frank. He laid them out, one by one, a meticulous tableau of her betrayal. "You lied about everything, Brenda," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but carrying the weight of years of deceit. "About Lily, about the stillbirth, about your one-night stand. You lied about Frank." Brenda stared at the documents, her face paling to an ashen gray. Her mouth opened, then closed. The bluster drained from her, leaving her speechless, utterly exposed. "Lily, Frank, how did you—" Her voice trailed off, a pathetic gasp. He watched her carefully constructed world crumble, her carefully maintained image, her social standing in the military community. It all evaporated in that moment. Dale ensured her reputation was quietly, but thoroughly, ruined within their social circles. A few well-placed phone calls, a few carefully selected bits of truth shared with close friends, and the whispers turned into a roar. She became a pariah, shunned at officer functions, her invitations drying up. His lawyer, a sharp, unblinking woman, worked tirelessly. Dale had provided her with every detail, every piece of evidence. The divorce proceedings were brutal, a cold, calculated dismantling of their shared life. Dale's aim was not just freedom, but financial devastation. With the evidence of her infidelity and deceit, her claims to their marital assets crumbled. He ensured Brenda received minimal assets, barely enough to start over. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Brenda, financially and socially devastated, left their quarters, a shadow of her former self. Dale stood in the empty house, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He had achieved his revenge, but the triumph was hollow, tinged with a profound emptiness. Years of his life, lost to a carefully orchestrated lie, stretched out behind him. The betrayal had been immense. With the divorce finalized, Dale began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding his life. The emptiness in his home was a stark reminder of what he had lost, but also what he had regained: his truth. He threw himself into his work, his military career progressing steadily, but he knew real healing lay elsewhere. He contacted Hope's Promise again, this time not as an anonymous seeker, but as Lily's biological father. He presented the documents, the DNA test he had quietly taken, and the story, stripped bare of all Brenda's lies. The legal process was lengthy, complicated by the sealed records and the years that had passed. But Dale was relentless. He presented his case with precision, with a quiet, undeniable strength. And eventually, after months of filings and interviews, he was granted the right to make contact. Lily was now a young adult, a stranger he had grieved for, a ghost he now had a chance to meet. He wrote her a letter, long and measured, explaining who he was, the circumstances of her birth, the betrayal that had kept them apart. He poured out his heart, not asking for anything, just offering the truth, the raw, painful truth, in an open door. He sealed it, mailed it through the agency, and waited, a new kind of anxiety churning in his gut. Lily, growing up in a modest, loving Midwestern family in Ohio, received the letter. She was shocked, her world tilting on its axis. Her adoptive parents, good, steady people, were equally surprised, but handled the news with grace and support. Lily, a quiet, thoughtful young woman, was curious. After much discussion with her adoptive family, she agreed to meet him. The first meeting was in a neutral cafe, miles from Washington. Dale saw her walk in, a young woman with a familiar tilt to her head, a hint of Brenda's features, but also a strength in her eyes that was uniquely her own. He was overwhelmed, a wave of emotion he hadn't felt in years washing over him. This was her, his daughter, the child he had thought was lost, now sitting before him, real and alive. Lily was cautious, observing him with a quiet intensity. She asked questions, direct and honest, and Dale answered them all, holding nothing back. She listened, processed, and slowly, gently, began to open up. She hadn't known any of this, had been told she was adopted due to her birth mother being too young to raise her. The new truth was difficult, but she was open. Over the next few months, Dale slowly integrated Lily into his life. They met for dinners, shared photos, and talked for hours on the phone. He told her stories about his military life, about his family, about the world she hadn't known existed. She, in turn, shared stories of her upbringing, her dreams, her quiet Midwestern life. A genuine bond began to form, tentative at first, then strengthening with each shared moment. His military career still demanded much, but he found a new purpose, a profound, unexpected joy in his relationship with Lily. Brenda, now living a diminished life, ostracized from the military community, working a low-wage job she resented, tried to make contact. Letters, phone calls, even a desperate appearance at his office. She tried to reach Lily too, through the agency. Dale firmly rebuffed her every time. Lily, after careful consideration and consultation with her adoptive parents, made it clear she was not interested in a relationship with her biological mother, not after the lies. Frank Carlson's once thriving business collapsed. The constant scrutiny, the drying up of contracts, and the subtle whispers Dale had so carefully placed all led to his financial ruin. He disappeared from the defense industry, a cautionary tale of a man who flew too close to the sun. Dale experienced a bittersweet victory. Justice, in its own cold, hard way, had been served. Brenda and Frank had faced the consequences of their deceit, but the profound personal cost remained. The years lost, the trust shattered, the painful journey to the truth, it left an indelible mark. He had Lily now, a precious, unexpected gift from the wreckage, but the scars of the past would always be there. Brenda, stripped of her social standing and financial security, grasped at straws. Lily, she reasoned, was her last chance, a path to redemption, or perhaps a desperate play for financial leverage. She initiated legal action, filing for custody or at least visitation rights. Her argument hinged on biological connection, presenting herself as a wronged mother seeking her child. The summons arrived in the mail, a stark white envelope. Dale felt a fresh wave of disgust, but also a hardening resolve. He sat with Lily, explaining the new development, his voice calm and steady. Lily, now fully aware of her history, was unequivocal. "She lied, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "I don't want a relationship with her." Her support was everything. Dale, with Lily's explicit wishes and the formidable legal counsel he now employed, fought Brenda in court. The proceedings were a brutal rehashing of the past. Dale's lawyer meticulously laid bare Brenda's deceptions, the fabricated stillbirth, the fraudulent claim of father unknown, the carefully constructed lies that had spanned years. The birth certificate, the adoption papers, Frank Carlson's confession, it all served as undeniable proof. Brenda, reduced to tearful pleas and self-pitying excuses, could offer no credible defense against the weight of the evidence. The court, seeing her history of deceit and Lily's clear rejection, ruled swiftly and decisively against Brenda. Dale's rights as Lily's father were affirmed, and Lily's choice to have no contact was honored. Brenda left the courtroom a defeated woman, her last desperate gamble lost. Not long after, a shadow from the past reappeared. Frank Carlson, utterly ruined, his business gone, his reputation in tatters, a husk of the man Dale had confronted in the bar, made a desperate attempt to approach Lily. He waylaid her after a class, a nervous, gaunt figure mumbling apologies and vague requests for forgiveness. Lily, unsettled, called Dale. Dale found Frank waiting near Lily's apartment, his shoulders slumped. Dale walked up to him, his presence radiating an authority that still had an effect on the former major. "Frank," Dale said, his voice low, a warning in every syllable. "Stay away from Lily. You have no claim on her. You never did. You won't get a second chance to ruin a life, not with her." Frank flinched, his eyes darting away. There was nothing left in him to fight. He simply nodded, turned, and walked away, disappearing into the anonymity of the city, a broken man who would never trouble them again. Lily thrived. She embraced her newfound family, building bridges between her adoptive parents and Dale, creating a larger, richer tapestry of love and support. Her relationship with Dale deepened, a quiet, profound connection rooted in shared honesty and the truth that had brought them together. She found a sense of completeness, an understanding of her origins that had been denied to her for so long. Dale reflected on the long, arduous journey. The betrayal had cut him to the bone. The revenge had been a cold, necessary act, and the path to redemption, unexpected and deeply personal, had come in the form of Lily. The pain, he knew, would always be a part of him, a scar from a wound that ran deep. But it no longer defined him. It was a chapter, not the whole book. He found a quiet, profound happiness in his new authentic life with Lily, a peace rooted in truth. They would build their future together, brick by honest brick. The story, for Dale, was not about what was lost, but what was found. He finally felt free from the heavy weight of the past, looking towards a simple, hopeful Midwestern horizon where the only thing that mattered was the truth and the family he had finally truly found.